Thank you so much, Annie. बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया. दोस्तों, सबको मेरा नमस्कार, सबको सलाम. I'm very grateful to the RTE Forum for inviting me here today. And to be with so many friends I haven't interacted with for a long time. The right to education was a dream. And I am privileged to have known some of those who made it happen. Professor Govinda is here on your panel. People who were there in the drafting of it, in the spirit of it. Anita Rampal has already spoken. But I want to begin my remarks by paying a special tribute to three people. Not because there are not others, but because they are people that one misses today when the Right to Education Act faces the kinds of challenges. जिस तरह की चुनौतियों का ब्यौरा आपने बाकी वक्ताओं से सुना, मैं अपनी श्रद्धांजलि एक तो विनोद रायना. Vinod was a one-man army when it came to his commitment to the RTE. I also want to speak of Anil Bodia, and I want to speak of Anita Kaul. Vinod, Bodia Saab and Anita, these are three people who are not with us today and were very, very instrumental, and we miss them for their unwavering commitment to education, and I want to start with a tribute to them and say, if they were here, what would they have been thinking and doing, whether in government or outside of government? It is a privilege to speak after so many fine speakers who are true experts in the area of education. Starting with Amrish Raiji and moving on to all my other speakers on this panel. It is a privilege because I get to pick up from points that they have all made and make them my own and present them to you with a few added thoughts that I have today. So speaking most generally about the RTE, the campaign to reclaim the RTE, as Anita Rampal said already, the campaign to reclaim anything has to be seen in a larger socio-political context. I remember years ago when I was working on the issue of sex selection for the BBC World Service Trust, we were doing a project and I was preparing a media strategy. And I said, we need to really focus on women's rights rather than on the rights of a girl fetus. And they said, why? I said, it's not the little fetuses they dislike. It's that girls grow up to be women. That's the problem. The problem is misogyny in India in all its forms. And likewise, so in RTE, it is not children's education or elementary education. It is the idea of education itself that is under challenge. So then our challenge has to be much, much graver than the implementation of the RTE law. We are talking about a social political context in which we are seeing all signs of India becoming more and more anti-women. And this is, when we talk about inclusion of girls in elementary education, if the entire context is becoming anti-women, and we see this today in the Global Gender Index, we've seen it very recently, India has slipped 28 places to rank 140 among 156 countries. This is the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report of 2021. India is the third worst performer in South Asia. What is going on? And in the context of this kind of discrimination against women, how do we then battle for inclusion of girls in elementary? That is bound to be affected. Likewise, we are talking about a kind of a very, very Brahmanical majoritarianism that is anti-Dalit in its politics, in the violence. It is categorically anti-Muslim. We've seen that not only in violence, but in ideological declarations across the board. This is not something that we can deny anymore. It is anti-Christian. You saw what happens to the nuns recently in Jhansi on a train station. And it is anti-basic constitutional values. So when education is more and more becoming instrumental, and I'm tired of this phrase, demographic dividend. It is such an instrumental idea of education. When universities are sought to be sanitized of all democratic and free expression, how can elementary education remain a sanctuary of anything? So I believe that we have to locate the struggle to reclaim the RTE within the much larger political struggles for the freedom to think, the freedom to speak, free expression, equity, basic democratic values. Linked to that, let us not fetishize any law, the RTE included, because the RTE was not the end, it was a means to an end, right? The end was our vision of equity. And so when the house is crumbling all around us, schools will not be islands of equity or democracy or equality. So given the nature of that challenge, and there was something very interesting that Amrishji said right in the beginning. He said it's been rolled out like a scheme, not like a right. And I heard Professor Govinda echoing that sentiment. I think, there is a lot in this moment in India's history where in many spheres of action, we are having to go back to the basics. And I think while we have for all of these 11 years focused rightfully on the RTE Act as a justiciable law, I think we have lost sight in our communication, in how it is seen in public discourse of Article 21A. And that is the fundamental right that is embedded in the Constitution in 2002, the 86th Amendment. Honestly, you talk to people in civil society, perhaps not those who work on RTE, you talk to human rights people, they can all tell you what Article 21 is. It's such a fundamental right. It's the right to life and personal liberty enshrined in our Constitution. But you ask them, what is Article 21A? And very few people can actually tell you what it is. It hasn't reached that level of being seen as a fundamental right. And we need to interrogate, why was it put under Article 21? Why did the right to education become a subsection of 21 and become Article 21A? Why? Because denial of that education then is a denial of a range of your basic citizenship entitlements, your ability to access it. It leads to intergenerational stagnation and therefore the absence of communities upon communities to be partners in partaking of equal fruits of India's development. And I think we need to campaign around the idea of Article 21A to bring home even to, human rights people, for example, are concerned deeply with civil liberties. We're concerned with people wrongfully in jails. But the right to education does not enter the human rights discourse with that much gravity. And so therefore it remains at the level of a law and a scheme and does not acquire that consciousness of it being seen as a human rights violation when that one Jamalu Makdam whom Anita mentioned and 20 other cases that I can mention, when their rights is violated in this fashion, then they are being denied a fundamental human right guaranteed by India's Constitution. And I think we need to, so what I'm arguing for is an articulation of this as a fundamental human right and not just as a law again, because like I said, I think in this moment we need to go back to a lot of our basics. I believe we need to use the courts to highlight pushbacks and to use individual cases of children who have been denied their rightful equity in education and use those children, get those parents and get them to file case after case on a violation of their fundamental human right to an education, a constitutional violation. So, I think the nature of the political campaign has to work in sync with other such political campaigns in this moment that are centered around Article 14 and Article 21. And I think we need to embed education as a fundamental right very, very firmly there. Let me talk briefly about what Anita had suggested, and Annie has also suggested, discrimination. It is something it's been my privilege to work over the years with Annie Namala herself on the idea of discrimination. And to me, it is still alarming that even within the RTE movement, at a time when all weaker sections are under attack, like I said, there is a kind of an upper caste, Brahmanical, patriarchal majoritarianism afoot in this country. But it is undeniable to anyone that the stated enemy of this regime is the Indian Muslim. Muslims are being stripped of their rights to public places, right to eat, right to, and of course the citizenship law highlights that. And yet it is incredible, and I think it should be a wake-up call for all of us, that we have still not been able to succeed in modifying Section 2D of the RTE Act to notify minority children as disadvantaged. That change has not happened in the central law. So in a sense, almost all the provisions of disadvantage, and in fact, in Section 8 and 9, both you see the word discrimination being used in the RTE Act, but actually it does not apply to Muslim children because they do not fit the definition of disadvantage in the law. And I would urge people in the RTE Forum, I would be happy to share with you very detailed recommendations on ways to tackle discrimination. Annie Namala was very much part of those conversations many years ago. I would be happy to share with you those recommendations on how we can propose to tackle discrimination in our schools for Dalits, for Muslims, and for girls. But certainly notifying minority kids under Section 2D has to be a very basic place for us to start. You know, there is some work on the sociology of the classroom certainly happening. Annie Namala's organization has done work. The education department at Jamia Millia Islamia has done some work, but it is not work that is out there as a substantial body of knowledge that we can build on and make a case nationally and internationally how much the schools are potentially damaging and undermining Dalit children, Muslim children. There is no recourse, by the way. So if you are discriminated against and you're treated like garbage in a schoolroom, there is no recourse to a law, there is no recourse to a rule, there is no person to go to, because you know, it's part of the excitement for those of us who work on broad issues of social justice was that the RTE as a legislation, a central legislation, had for the first time used the word discrimination in Section 8 and 9. And India, we must remember, is among the only democracies in the world, a highly flawed democracy, but still a democracy, but a democracy with not a single anti-discrimination law. Everybody's got one. America has it, UK has it, Australia, broad-based anti-discrimination legislation to protect against discrimination, against hate, against differential treatment. And the hope was that this opening in the RTE would expand our ability to develop a much more broad-based movement to finally legislate a broad anti-discrimination. And the RTE did not succeed in doing that. And I think that we need to resuscitate and revive that moment. You know, linked to discrimination, of course, people have mentioned COVID. And COVID is deeply linked. The post-COVID online school focus is deeply linked. And it is, of course, going to be those kids from Dalit, Adivasi, Muslim backgrounds, very poor kids who are going to be denied education. So what we're going to see is, I was actually alarmed. Last year, there was a PIL in the Delhi High Court, and it was good to see that the High Court ruled in favor of the PIL, but the private schools who opposed, this was a PIL merely asking for tablets and internet access for children, for EWS kids. And the High Court ruled in favor. It was pleasant, and it said that even private schools as well as government schools like Kendriya Vidyalayas should provide gadgets and an internet package to poor kids for online classes. And it used the word because not doing so amounts to discrimination and creates digital apartheid. And that's what we're really talking about. Sadly, there was a stay. It went to the Supreme Court, and Chief Justice Bobde stayed it. So we are talking about legal battles that must be waged, even though there is going to be a pushback. So I will really not take more of your time. I want to keep my comments brief, but many of these things were stated by all my previous speakers. We are, in fact, today looking at a loss of a generation of learners, perhaps many generations of learners. We are seeing an acute worsening of discrimination, sharpening of social divides, for which this country will pay the price for I don't know how many decades to come. I think we need to certainly have campaigns around the idea of this as a fundamental human right. We need to, at the very least, get a basic equality declaration in our schools saying this school does not discriminate on any grounds. And I remember we had drafted one many years ago. I'd again be happy to share that with you. I think we need to work on legal strategies. And I think we need to work on new forms of communication, because the idea that education is a human right for our weakest people is not somehow there in the public idea. It is heading the direction of privileged children will get privileged schooling, and the rest of them will get vocational skills, and they will go into contract jobs. And that is the vision that is working with the government school system. So I would urge all of us to pay heed to what all my previous speakers indeed said. That a campaign is called for, but alliances with larger civil society that's working on human rights. You know, you will not have Amnesty and Human Rights Watch focusing on education because it is not seen as right to life and personal liberty. And I believe we need to bring this idea of denial of education as a form of deep violation of a child's human rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Farah. I think your contribution has really opened up the whole concept of right to education, not just accessing the right to education, but the right of education being the part of our getting the larger rights, or being part of the human rights that we all have been given or embedded with. So I think in just moving beyond just a demand for right to education, but actually placing the right of education in the centrality of all our rights, to the kind of a vision that we have as India, to the kind of children that we would like to have growing up with. So I think it has also created a larger space where we can look at education as the fundamental right, as a human right. So thank you so much. We've had 4 very, very powerful advocates, speakers, giving us a lot of ideas as a forum, as all of us across the country talking and thinking about education. So maybe we have only about 10 minutes. Amrishi, I would like you to come in. How do you want to look at certain comments and questions from others? Or would you like to, having heard, would you like to make a few thoughts as how we move forward? कैसे आगे 10 मिनट है हमारे पास, कुछ I think some comments have come in. I don't know whether Srijita, are there some questions that need to be clarified, or Amrish ji, would you like to sort of bring some points up?
Srijita, if any comments in the chat box, we can address that. There were a couple of questions at the initial stages, which I think the later speakers have taken up in their
I think there is an agreement on the issues that have been raised and the strategies that have been placed. I think it really becomes for us to move forward as a forum on how, at this point and within the given larger social political context, how do we make education as a fundamental mobilizing or a fundamental framework for reclaiming the right of citizenship, development, education? So how do we make that beyond just education campaign? So I think it's really a serious matter, and we do see the concern and demand of people. We see the interest of children. We see RTE Forum has been able to create a broad framework of bringing together academic people, activists, other human rights actors. So I think we do have a framework and a space that we can push for. So how do we move that forward? I think Farah would like to add a point, and then over to Amrishji to take this campaign in this year ahead. Yeah, Farah.
Just a very quick point. I didn't focus enough on the post-COVID reality that we're living with and the dangers of online. And just very anecdotally, I live in a large apartment building. And I can tell you that as domestic workers are beginning to come back, what you're finding more and more, and I sort of interview them and speak to almost all of them just out of habit as a researcher, almost all of them, the one smartphone is being given to the boy or to boys. And how do you come and work? Because the girl is now becoming the caregiver. And we're seeing a regression to something we had fought against, decades ago, that young girls are not surrogate mothers looking after young children. And we're seeing that again resurface, certainly in urban spaces, I suspect even more in rural spaces. And it's going to hamper the education of our goal of gender equity and girls' inclusion so severely. I mean, I can give you like 20 anecdotes of exactly that phenomenon. Girl looks after younger siblings. Boys are getting the only smartphone that the parents can afford for this online schooling. So I think along with a campaign around a People's Commission, Article 21A, discrimination, and this issue of, we might need to do a campaign just for smartphones, a campaign for the internet, something that people seem to take so much for granted. If you campaign for something like the internet for a poor child, it is counterintuitive. Everybody assumes sabke paas to hai, but sabke paas nahi hai. It's the basic cheese inke paas nahi hai. And I think this can also be a focus of a potential campaign in Amrish and RTE Forum's very capable hands. I just wanted to make that little intervention. Thank you, Annie, for giving me time to do so.
Thank you, Farah. I think Anita ji also would like to, give a last thought. Please, Anita.
My last thought is that, even though we have looked at so many things, and I'm so happy that Farah could make it and also sum up many of the ideas that had come. But this is one thing when Farah says, I'm very worried. I cannot campaign for the internet for children just so that they can do their education, because I know education is just completely shifting to online mode. So the kind of struggle that we've done for 40 years to try and say what kind of education, what activities, what meeting together, what talking and sharing your ideas is just being brushed aside at every level. Right from the beginning to higher education. The policy actually says it. So I think I would like to resist that for even privileged children. And I found that when I wrote that, and Times of India invited me for a discussion on digital education, and they kind of edited one or two words which said that only 20% are logging in, or even if they're logging in, really, what are they doing? But the maximum responses they got was from privileged parents who said they are very worried because this is what's happening. They don't think that this is good for the child's emotional development. They don't think this is good for education, but this is what they're getting pushed into. So I think we have to resist that rather than say that the poor child needs, an internet. But anyway, these are discussions we'll continue with.
We should.
Yeah,
we should.
Yeah.
Anita, I cannot agree with you more. This is an articulation for a conversation.
Yeah.
It is a plea for a conversation around what is going on, because I do see this continuing. For the next year, they're not going to open schools. And poor kids have lost already a year. They're going to lose a second year. We need to figure out how we're going to manage this, because this COVID crisis ain't going away anywhere soon. I believe my son, who goes to a private school, but he's just 13. I saw that he lost a whole year of education despite having a computer and the internet. So I hear you. I'm completely with you in spirit. I think we need to have a longer conversation to take this forward. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I think, as you say, it's really many conversations that we need. I mean, we've not really, people have mentioned, what about children with disabilities? We've not been able to really look at them, or, distant areas and Northeast children. There are so many complexities that we have to handle. So I think the forum is some place where a lot of these things can come together, and there is representation from across the country, and people's concern is very, very evident. So I would sort of request Amrish ji to do the closing with all the thoughts that we have presented here, and also plans for moving it ahead.
Yeah.
I would like to take a very short time to
thank
really
you, Anita.
I think Amrish ji will thank all the panel members from my side. Really thank you for an excellent time of engagement and discussion and thoughts that we can carry forward. Amrish ji.
Yeah, and this we received wonderful suggestions to take forward this RTE movement. We are not going to give up this right, which we got after the decades. Take it forward, this fundamental right and this Right to Education Act to be implemented at the grassroots level. And the suggestions came here. We will compile all the suggestions, and we will take it in our National Council with the other networks and civil society organizations, because education is a basic component for the development. So we will take it up and we will discuss in our National Council and state forums, and we will start this because what Professor Dubey has said, that they are actually distracting the mind of the people from right to education to NEP. NEP is such a promise which is never going to fulfill. Or NEP is diluting the whole RT, and whole exercise is government exercise is moving around the implementation of NEP. And NEP is a very confusing document. So we will take it RT movement forward with the help of our state forum, civil society organization, educationists, and all those who worked hard for the universalization of education. Thank you once again to the participants, speakers, and moderator. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amrish ji. Thank you, all the panel members and the RTE Forum. Thank you.
Thank you.
We should have a face-to-face meeting.
Sure.
June.
Yes.
Yeah.
We should have.
Start, sir.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.